Alright, Gamer Bears, it is time for a new episode of Unused Content in Games, and today we have Super Smash Bros. 64, or just Super Smash Bros., and the unused content in that game. So, let's begin with this little blurb over here, but before we truly begin, I'd like to ask those of you who haven't already, and if at any point in this video you enjoy it, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's for free, and you can always change your mind later on. So, let us begin with Dragon King, the fighting game. For those of you who didn't know, actually, and I mentioned this in my playthrough, Smash Bros. Was originally going to be a fighting game platform fighter called Dragon King, the fighting game, and Sakurai himself states it. Super Smash Bros. Was initially developed by Masahiro Sakurai and Satoru Iwata in their downtime in a form titled Dragon King, the fighting game, and please disregard the ads sitting over here, they're really annoying and they keep showing up, which lacked Nintendo characters at the time. Sakurai, however, felt that the game could not provide the proper atmosphere on a home console without a recognizable cast. Nintendo characters were soon added, and the game was redesigned and renamed. I guarantee you if this came out today, they would have been added for marketing reasons, not for recognizable reasons. A few screenshots of Dragon King had been released, and footage of the prototype was shown on Sakurai's YouTube channel, Sakurai on Creating Games. I'll link that in the link description for those of you who might want to see it. Below are the only known images of the game shown prior to Masahiro Sakurai on Creating a Game. Alright, and here's some footage of it. Fun fact, actually, and I mentioned this in my playthrough as well. Captain Falcon's moveset is actually based on these guys. His body type in said game is also based on how they fight. They're kind of just textureless stick figures in a way. They kind of look like one of those little wooden humanoid toys, if you know what I'm talking about. And notice how the percentage is all the way over here rather than on the bottom screen like in the final game. And this kind of looks like maybe an early-ish version of Final Destination, though this is the only Smash Bros. Game where set stage isn't even playable. And this guy over here looks like he's doing some sort of back aerial. Or a bear, as the competitive scene calls it. Here's another footage of that. Got the little sidekick that ended up being Captain Falcon's forward smash. And here's another much less high-textured image. With this weird under-texture, or whatever the hell that is. Alright, what about stages? Fight to survive on stages with a variety of gimmicks. I always found gimmicks in Smash Bros. Games annoying, by the way. Two characters meet on flat ground. Well, not anymore. In this game, you'll fight in places like this. That kind of looks like, well, obviously there's a bunch of metal beams there. I always thought this might have been an early version of certain other stages that we'll see in later Smash Bros. Games, like 75M, or Murray Tower in Smash Ultimate, something like that. I think those stages take some small inspiration from here, in terms of their layout. And this, with terrain effects at the core of the game, a stage is big enough for 4 players simultaneous play. The physiological approach to battle is changed. And this was the birth of the platform fighter genre. Alright, this guy over here, this looks like maybe an early version of a metal character, like in the final game of Metal Mario, as this character, who's in gray/silver, has a different percentage bar over here, completely different to the other characters. So maybe that could have been a separate boss in some way? Who knows? Also, this image is kind of funny. It's just, the background's literally just some woman's legs. Sakurai, you horny bastard, though. I don't blame him. Just gonna be honest, your legs are great. But anyways. Alright, here's another kind of crappy looking image. And here's another image, which is less high quality as well, and the background is just a sky texture. Things showing up on my screen again. Alright, and Sakurai, you really can't see anything from how zoomed out this is, but he's just playing his little prototype that he made. Either that or that's on his old school computer. Alright, below here is Sakurai's YouTube channel. I'll put that in the link in the description below for those of you who might not already know about it. Developing of Smash Bros. Our fighters. Scrap fighters. Bowser was planned with Shigeru Miyamoto claiming in an interview that he was cut late in development. If y'all didn't already know, and this is another thing I mentioned in my playthrough, that there's a fan-made Smash 64 mod called not Project 64, but 64 Remix, Super Smash Bros. 64 Remix, which has various characters such as Bowser, QOTD, Marth, Mewtwo, and a bunch of other characters, even some that aren't Nintendo-related. Alright, King DDD was playable at one point, but was scrapped due to lack of development time, so he was put into the game, but just got later scrapped. Which, I have a theory that in Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, the model that King DDD used in that game would have been used in this game as well. Since, that game did come out just a year after Smash 64 did, or about a year and a half afterward. Our Mewtwo was originally planned to be playable, but was scrapped due to lack of development time. According to Sakurai, Mewtwo was actually worked on in-game, but was just never finished. And we'll hear that later on in another later Smash Bros. Game. But later on, he did become playable in Melee. Same with DDD and Brawl, same with Bowser in Melee, and Marth in Melee. Marth was intended to be playable, but had to be scrapped due to lack of development time. And Clefairy was considered for inclusion as a clone for Kirby at the same rate as Jigglypuff. Imagine a universe where Clefairy was playable instead of Jigglypuff. This could have also been a reference to the fact that Clefairy was originally going to be the mascot for Pokemon before it was settled to be Pikachu. Imagine a Pokemon Pink, and it was slightly off topic. I remember also hearing that Pit would have been playable at some point in this game too, as well as Meowth, weirdly enough. But Meowth was later turned into a Pokemon. These ads are so annoying, they keep showing up. Alright, Bowser, Mewtwo, and Marth will later on be playable in Melee. That's the best game of all time, by the way, in my opinion. While King DDD will later be playable in Brawl. These ads. I'll probably just start ignoring them. Alright, stages. The stage, Meta, Crystal, and the stage for Race to the Finish both have spawn locations for all 4 players, implying that they might have been playable outside of the single-player game mode, especially Metal Crystal. Another stage that's playable in the Smash 64 Remix mod. But anyways, however, it could simply be a form of error handling, in the case someone lacks the game to play these stages in Versus mode, which I don't think is a thing in the final game, but whatever. Alright, differences. Dreamland had considerably darker shading of green for the foliage, as well as much taller grass in the foreground and background. Alright, and here's a picture of that. It definitely looks much darker, and everything looks a bit flatter. Alright, Peach's Castle lacks the bottom platforms. The brown, soft platforms on the sides with the wedge blocks have a different color. The bottom platform is lighter colored. Hyrule Castle had a considerably different color scheme, with the background having a higher contrast and the castle itself having a shade of brown. And Saffron City's main roof had a considerably brighter pink texture. The roof on the left building is colored green, while the floating platforms above it is brown. Our 2 stages have leftover data in Smash 64, and they can be accessed through use of the debug menu. Small is just a small version of Dreamland. Is assumed to be an early version of Dreamland, as you can see right over here. And I don't know how they say it's assumed to be an early version, but it clearly is an early version of Dreamland, but whatever. And it shares many of the same textures and models as the aforementioned stage, as well as a similar platform layout. New is assumed to be an early prototype stage, again of Dreamland. Even earlier than small. It features an unusual layout as well as number of visible walls, leading to frequent glitches involving movement. And here are some closer pictures of them. We already showed that one being a darker color in grass, as well as the trees that aren't in the final game. An early version of Hyrule Castle, though you can barely see it, since most of this is zoomed into Link. An older version of Saffron City with considerably more pink and purple, which actually I think looks better than in the final game. An early version of Saffron City, note the different colors on the buildings and platforms. I believe the first Pokemon Stadium was a stage at the time of the first Smash Bros. So I'm surprised that wasn't a stage, but whatever. Here's the early version of Dreamland. Another early version of Dreamland, with this weird-ass platform over here and those early wooded platforms, I guess, for testing purposes. Alright, an early version of Princess Peach's Castle. Note the lack of top platforms and how all the characters spawn in on the main platform. And it looks kind of cramped, so I'm glad they changed that in the final game. Also, Link's icon, if you notice, is a little different than in the final game. It's not the Triforce, it's the upside-down triangle instead. Alright, here's another early version of that, also with Link having the early icon. Note the lighter coloring from the platforms and its lower positioning, as well as the red hit effect, which goes unused in the final game, which would have been cool, actually. I guess if you got hit hard enough in this game, well, Link is clearly too low a percentage to be killed here, but maybe that could, like, y'all know the weird black and red squiggly effect in both Smash 4 and Smash Ultimate, and the zoom-in effect in Smash Ultimate if the character gets hit hard enough? This might have been an early version of that, too, and we don't ever see that again until Smash 4, and later on Smash Ultimate. I note the positioning, the brown platforms, and the wider coloring of the wedge blocks have. And here's another early version of this. And once again, Link has that early image for his icon. Alright, items. Initially, the crate lacked the Smash Bros. Logo seen on the final version side. an early crate left behind Donkey Kong, right over here, and it doesn't have the Smash Bros. Logo like all later versions will have, as it mentions. Alright, gameplay. According to an interview with Miyamoto, a time attack mini-game mode was originally planned, but was scrapped later in development. It is not known what sort of gameplay this mode would feature. Luigi's dash attack and Samus's up aerial are both supposed to have final hits that are supposed to deal more damage and knockback, but do not spawn due to a developer oversight. Later installments in the series would fix this issue, however, not entirely. See, that is the case for Samus, but not the case for Luigi. In Melee, Luigi's final hit for his dash attack doesn't exist, so that oversight was clearly carried over and wasn't fixed finally until Brawl. At the time, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time was being developed alongside Smash Bros. Due to the developer's lack of information. Link wields the boomerang as one of his special moves, an item which is exclusive to Young Link originally. I guess they didn't know that. Well, it was developed at the same time, so there's no way Sakurai could have known that. Additionally, even though I'm pretty sure Ocarina of Time came before Smash 64, but whatever. Additionally, Link has 2 voice clips. I guess the development time for this game just took longer than Ocarina of Time is all. But Link has 2 voice clips that are not sourced directly from Ocarina of Time, one being his KO scream, and another that remains unused in the game's files. This suggests that the voice acting was provided for both games before their releases. Or for both games. So I guess some of those are just original voice clips. Every character has an unused animation that will instantly KO them when activated, similar to the instant KO in later installments. It is unsure what the animation was for, but it is speculated it was going for an unused stage KO feature, possibly activated if a character was eaten by a piranha plant or sank in Planet Zibi's acid. A talk between Masahiro Sakurai and Satoru Iwata states that Sakurai intended to add final smashes into the game. There are a lot of those, actually. I mentioned those in my playthrough as well. Get this ad to go away real fast. Thank you, ad. Go bye. While he did record some dialogue for them initially, limitations for the Nintendo 64 prevented their inclusion. Final Smashes later become a reality 9 years later in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and by extension they were originally going to be Melee as well, but Melee does notoriously have a really low development time of only 13 months, so there's no way they could have included that for every character in said game. While the sound effects for the Final Smashes are not accessible through normal play, they can be found throughout debug menus. These sounds include Ness yelling PK Star Storm, Pikachu charging energy, and Captain Falcon yelling Come on Blue Falcon. The latter exclusive in the Japanese version. Other characters heard include Fox, Kirby, and Samus, as well as Fox yelling Ike, which means come on, I believe, or something, or whatever. I forgot what that meant in Japanese. Kirby yelling really hard, going, yeah, and Samus having a large beam sound effect. Excuse me for the cringe voice acting, but I wanted to illustrate it somehow, right? There are some unused announcer voice clips like, are you ready? Final stage, bonus stage, and draw a game. Some of these would actually be used in later games like bonus stage and Melee. The first 3 are assumed to have been intended for the one-player mode, or later games will know it as classic mode, as the announcer does not announce anything related to those stages. Are you ready? Is assumed to have played before beginning a match or bonus stage, similar to how the announcer does so in later installments outside of multiplayer modes. The bonus stage voice clip is likely meant to a play, I guess is what they meant, whatever, before beginning either 3 bonus stages. Final stage is most likely the final stage where the player faces against Master Hand, whose name would not be announced until Smash 4. Though Master Hand does have unused voice clips in both Melee and Brawl, but we'll get to those in a later video. Draw a game is most likely related to Versus mode, where the announcer would say if a match ended up as a draw on the results screen. It may also be related to the cut time attack minigame. The voice clip was likely scrapped in favor of sudden death. Alright, aesthetics. The placeholder question mark boxes for the unblockable characters, or unlockable characters, on the character select screen were initially colored instead of the ordinary gray silhouettes with fiery backgrounds that appear in the final game. These colored boxes match the player's number colors of red, blue, yellow, and green. The series symbol of Yoshi was originally not supposed to have spots on the egg, and the symbol for the Legend of Zelda series was a single upside-down triangle, as I mentioned earlier. Alright, the original character select screen, here's what it looks like. And notice how the unlockable characters for Luigi, Ness, Jigglypuff, and Captain Falcon are all these different colors instead of how they appear in the final game. Though all of the 8 original characters have their original concept art for this. And Yoshi's icon is a little different, though we can't see Link's here, but we've seen it in previous images. Alright. And alternate costumes. Both Jigglypuff and Pikachu have leftover data for an unused alternate costume for each of them, as you can see here. These would be their 4th alternate costumes, although only 3 are accessible in a free-for-all battle. Pikachu's 4th alternate costume was to be a yellow party hat, and Jigglypuff's 4th alternate costume was to be a yellow bow. Or it could have been an early version of the yellow crown that Jigglypuff would have in later games. These alternate costumes are not accessible through debug mode, but if they are accessed through other means, the skin hue for Pikachu and Jigglypuff would be abnormal, but the hat or bow will remain green. Normally, invalid alternate costumes would yield a corrupt stock icon and the latest occurring costume, but Jigglypuff and Pikachu are the only exception to this rule because they were loaded into the game but never used. Sakurai mentioned that he considered having Fox's alternate costume being based off of other members of the Star Fox Team Falcon Lombardi, who will be playable later in Melee and every Smash Bros. Game since, Peppy Hair, and Slippy Toad. Which actually would have been pretty cool, but they all have different body proportions, so it makes sense that they didn't do that. But Sakurai decided against it, and would use the ones that were completely original to the game due to the fact that Slippy didn't have a moveset like the others. Starting from Smash 4, the concept of fighters with different characters as alternate costumes would be reutilized for various characters such as Bowser Jr. with the Koopalings, Olimar with Alf, Hero with the other Dragon Quest protagonists, and Steve with the other Steve characters such as Alex, Enderman, and the Zombie. And here's a closer look at the yellow Pikachu icon, though it's really hard to see. And the Jigglypuff one, with a little bow. Though the green bow I think is better. Alright, well, with that being said, that's all the unused content I can find. I will put all these videos in the description for those of you, if you are interested in seeing that for other unused content in this game. So, if y'all enjoyed this and you want to see more, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And answer the question of the day, as usual for these videos, what is unused content, one of the unused contents that we went over that you would have liked to see in the final game? For me, Final Smash is easy. Would have been so cool to have those way back in Smash 64 and by extension Melee. Had Melee just had a bit more development time, I have a feeling that game would have had those. But anyways, next time we will do unused content for my favorite game of all time, Super Smash Bros. Melee. So, thank you all for watching. Have a perfect day.